What we're going to read from is the first of the 4 seed verses of the Bhagavad Gita. So it is explained by the Acharyas that there are 4 verses in the Bhagavad Gita which summarize the entire teaching, that give the essence of the teachings of the Gita. So the first of these 4 is chapter 10, text number 8. So it's 10.8, 10.9, 10.10, and 10.11. So we're going to read the verse, chapter 8, the verse from verse 8, chapter 10. We'll read the purport, and then we're going to have some discussion, and we'll explain a few things about how things work. Okay, so this is Krishna speaking to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. I'll begin with the Sanskrit. Aham savasya pravavo mata savam pravartate iti matva bhajante mam Bhuta Bhavana samamvitaha. So Krishna says this to Arjuna, translation: I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. I'm going to actually go through the word for word so you know how that translation has come about. So aham means I, sarvasya of all, prabhavaha, the source of generation, mataha from me, sarvam everything, pravartate emanates, iti thus, matva knowing, bhajante become devoted, mam unto me, buddhaha the learned, bhava samamvitaha with great attention. So now we're going to read some of the purport, and then we're going to go from there. So what I'll do is with the purport, I won't read everything because it's quite long, but I'll share certain selected sections which I think are relevant for our discussion. Then we're going to elaborate on that. So this is the purport. A learned scholar who has studied the Vedas perfectly and has information from authorities like Lord Chaitanya, and who knows how to apply these teachings, can understand that Krishna is the origin of everything in both the material and spiritual worlds. And because he knows this perfectly, he becomes firmly fixed in devotional service to the Supreme Lord. He can never be deviated by any amount of nonsensical commentaries or by fools. All Vedic literature agrees that Krishna is the source of Brahma, Shiva, and all other demigods. In the Atharva Veda, Gopala Tapani Upanishad 124, it is said, Yo Brahmanam Vedati Purvam Yovai Vedamscha Gopayati Sma Krishna. Translation: it was Krishna who in the beginning instructed Brahma in Vedic knowledge and who disseminated Vedic knowledge in the past. Then again in the Narayana Upanishad 1, it says, Ata Purusho Havai Narayano Kamayata Prajaha Shriyati. Translation: then the Supreme Personality Narayan desired to create living entities. The Upanishad continues, Narayanad Brahma Jayate, Narayanad Prajapati Prajayate, Narayanad Indro Jayate, Narayanad Astu Vasavo Jayate, Narayanad Ekadasa, Rudra Jayate, Narayanad Dwajashaditya. From Narayan, translations, from Narayan, Brahma is born, and from Narayan, the patriarchs are also born. From Narayan, Indra is born. From Narayan, the 8 Vasus are born. From Narayan, the 11 Rudras are born. From Narayan, the 12 Adityas are born. This Narayan is an expansion of Krishna. Okay, so let's stop here for now. So we're talking about this idea of Ishvara, and this is one of the top and key subjects of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is said to have 5 themes. So one is Ishvara. Ishvara means supreme controller. Another one is Prakriti. Prakriti means material nature. Another subject is Jiva, which means the living entities. Another subject is Kala. Kala means time. And one other topic is Karma. Karma means activity. Now, I wanted to show you how all of these come together. So, and this is important for us to understand, because if you understand this, it actually helps you to understand life itself. Very, very interesting. These 5 topics have been explained through the tradition of gurus and teachers to be the 5 themes of the Bhagavad Gita. Let's explain how this works. First of all, we have this idea of Ishvara. Now, in the normal, let's say in the normal wider society, people talk about Ishvara, meaning they talk about God, they talk about the controller. And that is one aspect, okay? That is one key aspect. So God, G-O-D. So in the secular or normal sense, they think about Ishvara or controller being G-O-D. G stands for generator, the person who creates everything. O stands for operator, the person who keeps everything going. D stands for destroyer, the person who destroys everything ultimately at the end. So in this understanding, the more broad religious understanding, God is the generator, the operator, and the destroyer. G-O-D. But there's more. There's more. This term Ishvara in the Sanskrit, it means literally controller. But when we're talking about the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedic literatures, it is also sometimes explained that there are many Ishvaras, meaning there are many people who have some ability to control, but there is only one Param Ishvara. Param means topmost or supermost. So sometimes it gets confusing for people because the word Ishvara is used in different places and therefore can denote different individuals. But only one person consistently throughout the Vedas is considered to be the Param Ishvara. And that Param Ishvara, as stated in the verse which we just read, which is one of the key verses, is Krishna. And he's declaring that to Arjuna, that I am the Aham Sarvasya Prabhavo, the source of everything. Now, interestingly enough, that same understanding is also given by the demigods. So for example, in the Brahma Samhita, which is the actual statements of Lord Brahma, right? It's a literature where Lord Brahma is speaking. Lord Brahma explains Ishvara Parama, Krishna, Satchit Ananda Vigraha. And bear in mind, if you listen to what I've just said, Ishvara Parama. So again, Parama, Param. So Lord Brahma is saying the controller who is supermost. Ishvara Parama is who? Krishna. Then he goes on to explain Satchit Ananda Vigraha. Anadi Adi Govinda, Sarva Karana Karanam. Sarva means all. Karana Karanam means he's the supreme cause of all causes. Right? The supreme cause of all causes. How does this work? We said these 5 factors, 5 themes of the Bhagavad Gita: Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Karma, Kala. So Ishvara means the supreme personality of Godhead in the ultimate sense, the person who's the controller of all the other controllers. Now, the reason why we talked about this as a theme for life is because these 5 factors are also key elements that can help us to understand our position in reality. So first of all, Krishna is the supreme controller. We are Jiva, okay? We are living entities. We are Mamayavamso Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, Manashishtani Nindriyani, Prakriti Shtani Kashati. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Mama Eva Amsa. Mama means my, Eva means certainly, Amsa means part and parcel, Mamai Vamsa. So Krishna says the Jiva, the living entities, us, we're part and parcel of him. But he says what? It says, Mamai Vamsa Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana Mana Shishtanindriyani Prakritishtani Kashati. Mana means mind, Shishtani means 6, Indriyani means the senses. So Indriyani, if we talk about the senses, sense of sight, smell, taste, touch, etc. Indriyani therefore means the body. And the reason why, sorry, Mamai Vamso Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana Mana Shishtani Indriyani Prakritishtani Kashati. Yes. So Indriyani means 6. Sorry, Indriyani means the senses. Prakritishtani Kashati. Prakriti means the material energy. As part and parcel of Krishna, in our original state, we directly relate to Krishna. And that process of connecting directly to Krishna, which is said to be the eternal state of the soul, that process is called Bhakti Yoga. So the Supreme connects with the Jiva through Bhakti Yoga or devotional service. However, in this verse, if we do not want to connect with the Supreme by loving service, then we automatically default to another way of connecting. And that is a connection to the Supreme Controller through matter. Okay, so what is that theme? That other theme of the Bhagavad Gita? Prakriti. Prakriti means the material nature. And this is actually the story of everyone's life. If I choose to connect with the Supreme through loving service, then I'm actually disconnecting from the material nature and I'm connecting through the spiritual nature. It's like you have 2 mobile phones, and you definitely have to speak to the person on the other end of the phone. Actually, you have 1 mobile phone, and you have your parents upstairs and you're downstairs. Now, if you want to go and spend direct time with the parents, then that's one relationship. That's a very intimate connection. If we don't want to see them directly, then because it's their house and they're calling and we have to have some connection, then we end up speaking to them through the medium, through a different medium. So the living entity, us, a jiva, the parents are like the Supreme. And if we don't connect to them directly, we have to do it through some particular material medium. And that material medium is what we call Prakriti. But that Prakriti also has a relationship with the Supreme Person. Okay, this is why we read this verse. Krishna says that I'm the source of all spiritual and material worlds. So how does that work? There's a battery. Just like you have battery in your phone or a battery in your car, there's also a battery that is the that energizes matter. What is that battery? What causes the material energy to move over time and to move downwards over time? Think about this carefully. Think about your house, or think about your body, because the body is made of material energy. What is it that causes the body over time to come up and then deteriorate and eventually leave? It's a 4-letter word beginning with the letter T. I'd like someone to just type it into the chat window. What do you think that is? What is it that causes all material things over time to come up and ultimately to decay and ultimately to disappear? 4-letter word beginning with T. Absolutely, Leah. Thank you very much for that. So this is another of the 5 themes. So you can see how everything works. That time in Sanskrit is called kala. So between Krishna and the material nature, there's time. So Krishna allows time to cause the material nature to go down. Between the jiva, us, and the material world, there's something also. What happens when we come into the material world, what do? We engage in karma. While we're in the material world, we're doing good activity, bad activity, and therefore between the jiva, between us and the material world, there's karma. That's the interaction. That is the activity that takes place between the living entity and the material energy itself. And between Krishna, Ishvara, and between us, if we're wise and if we choose, the link between us and Krishna is bhakti yoga. That is the link between all of this. I want to read you some more points just to pull into context. And what we've read is just so many different types of evidence according to scripture itself as to who is the supreme. So let us read on. It is said in the same Vedas, Brahmanyo Devaki Putraha, the son of Devaki, Krishna, is the supreme personality. That's in the Narayan Upanishad 4. Then it is said, Eko Vaya Narayana Asin, na Brahma, na Asino, na Po, Nagni Somo, Neme Dwat, Aprivi, na Nakshatrani, na Suryaha. In the beginning of the creation, there was only the supreme personality, Narayan. There was no Brahma, no Shiva, no water, no fire, no moon, no earth, no heaven, no stars in the sky, no sun. Maha Upanishad 1.2. In the Maha Upanishad, it is also said that Lord Shiva was born from the forehead of the Supreme Lord. So various texts, again and again, clearly indicate the position of the Ishvara. There are also different pastimes. So in the Vedic literatures, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Purana, which is considered, and it's explained in a literature called the Tattva Sandarbha by Jiva Goswami, who's one of the greatest scholars of the Vedas in history, over in complete history. He wrote a literature called the Tattva Sandarbha. And in the Tattva Sandarbha, which is a brilliant literature, he explains from the basis of just the living entity. He goes from where we are all the way through to explain why the Srimad Bhagavatam is the topmost Vedic literature. And it's very interesting. He begins by explaining that every one of us have 4 defects. So one defect is that we have limited senses. So we can only see so many things. We can only hear so much within a certain range. We know, for example, that there is a dog whistle. When you blow a dog whistle, you can't hear the whistle, but the dog can. We know that there are different types of light, ultraviolet, infrared light, but we can't see those with the naked eye. We know that there are microorganisms, but we can't see those with the naked eye. But if we have a microscope, we can see the same thing. So they exist. So we have limited senses. We also have a propensity or a tendency to make mistakes. Okay? As the saying goes, to err is human. We have a tendency to have what we call illusion. So the tendency is to misperceive something. So for example, when we look at the sun, because light travels at a finite speed, whenever we look at the sun, we're seeing the sun's position as it was 8.5 minutes ago. And the last one, and this is very important, we have a propensity to cheat. In other words, cheating is when I pretend to be an authority on something, even though I'm not actually an authority. And that cheating tendency is also what causes people who don't really have deep understanding to just assert something because that is what they are comfortable asserting, or that is what they are used to. Now, we can do that. You know why? The reason why we can do that is because as living beings, we have free will. But many of you, or all of us on this call are adults, and it's very interesting. You see as an adult, that sometimes you may have told someone who's young some guidance, some insight, but you knew or you saw that because they were young and because they were attached, they didn't want to listen. And sometimes what had to happen was that because they were so attached, you just had to say, okay, I've shared this with you, but because you're so attached, you can't hear. So therefore, that same young person has to go through some difficulty. And after going through some difficulty, they realize, you know what? This elder told me this before and I didn't listen, but now I've seen it. A classic example is someone is looking to go into a relationship, and that person's family, they can all see this is not going to be a good relationship. All the signs are that this isn't going to work out for you. Why don't you consider someone else? But it's too late now because they're attached. So therefore, they end up going into the relationship, having difficulties, having challenges. Eventually they break up, and then you're thinking, well, I did tell you before this was not going to be a good relationship. The reason why we can have some observations like that is because of objectivity. The reason why we can have objectivity is because we're not attached. Humility is therefore the greatest form of objectivity. There's a story, and the story was about a world famous school of music. And parents from very wealthy backgrounds would try to get their children to go to the school. It was a very elite school, and they would charge huge amounts of money to take students on and teach them. And it's very interesting, when a child would come to the school for the interview in order to join the school, what they would do is they would test to see if the child has ever learned any musical instruments before. And there was two classes of children. Some of the young people would say, no, I've never learned an instrument before. And they would be charged one fee. You would also have children who were going to the school, and in their interview, they would be asked, have you ever played any instruments before? And the children would say yes. Those children were charged even more money. And the reason why those children were charged even more money is because they would have to unlearn the things that they've already become attached to in order to be able to properly understand how to play that particular instrument. So we want to think about that, because it's really important when we are trying to make progress in Vedic understanding to begin from that basis of humility, to begin from that basis of openness, but also to understand that if I'm open and humble with a sincere desire to know the truth, and I repeat, a sincere desire to know the truth, as opposed to a desire to reinforce my own idea, then life becomes an amazing adventure. Why does it become an amazing adventure? Because the more that you understand, the more that we understand the truth, the more that we align with the truth, the more that we can experience that in the ultimate reality, and this is really important, the absolute truth, one of the most important things to know about the absolute truth, and I'll be honest with you, this is something I've been meditating on over the last few years. And for me, this is absolutely essential. The most important thing to know about the absolute truth isn't just a philosophical idea. One of the most important things to know about the absolute truth is that the absolute truth is blissful. Now, why is that important to know? The reason why it's important to know is because that bliss is what each and every single person is searching for. That is what we people are searching for. From the moment people go to work, wake up, look after friends, family, and so on, we're looking for deep, lasting happiness. One of the most powerful things when I first started studying the Bhagavad Gita as it is, I studied it while I was at university. I was in my second year of university. So I think in the introduction, I went to the London School of Economics. And there I was studying politics, as well. I was studying philosophy and economics. And one of the interesting things I saw was that with modern Western philosophers, all they would do is speculate. So it became an egoistic competition where one person is making some guess about reality, and then someone else wants to defeat that person so that they can feel superior with another speculation, and another person would defeat that person with another speculation, and they all suffered from one thing. And someone used this term very nicely, so I'm going to share this with you. The one thing that all of these philosophers suffered with was conclusophobia, fear of coming to any conclusion. And it was interesting, I came to realize why. The reason why they feared coming to any conclusion is because as long as you can mentally speculate, you don't have to do anything. But the difficulty that they had put into their own life was that by not being humble and by not being honest, the honest truth is, if we have limitations, how can we know the absolute truth just by our guesswork? Imagine your son or daughter is going to hospital and they're ill. Would you give them to a doctor who says, you know what, I'm just going to guess what's wrong with them? It would be absolutely terrifying. You'd want someone who's able to understand the truth because they have learned it from the proper source. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the meaning of parampara. Right? This is actually what it means. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also makes the point, evam parampara praptam imam rajasayo viduhu. He says this knowledge is meant to come through parampara. It's meant to come in the lineage of teachers going back to that same supreme. And what that does is it helps us to make sure that the information, the knowledge, the understanding that we're given is intact, and therefore, when it's applied, is potent. I'm going to share with you something else, because as far as I'm concerned, we're all family. I was talking to my wife this morning, and I'm just thrilled. One of the things that's exciting me so much in life is this idea of advice. What my wife and I were discussing this morning is, because we're working on some projects, some different devotional projects. And we were realizing that what happens in any project, in organizations, in communities, a lot of people know how to do something. Very few people know what to do and why it should be done. You see? So that first point of what should be done and why, that is perhaps the most important of all these points. If you know how to do loads of different things, but you don't know what should be done, then we become like the person who's digging for gold in all the wrong places, right? They know how to dig, but they don't know where to dig. So we're similar. We all know we want to be happy, but very few people know how to be happy, how to live so that they will be truly happy. And in a similar way, many people want to speculate about who is the supreme. Very few people understand the power of humility and the humility to inquire sincerely from the proper source, from the correct source. A, to understand what the truth is, but more than this, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Adhyatma Vidya Vidyanam. He says of sciences, I am the supreme science of self-realization. What does that mean? It means if you have a proper science understanding and you apply that proper understanding, you will get a distinct result. As long as people have a wrong understanding, whatever they do, they're not going to get the deep bliss and happiness that they want. So it's not just a question of belief. It's a question of having the proper understanding and then applying that understanding to see the results in one's own life. What's really excited me is that I've come through direct practice to have so many understandings that the absolute truth is blissful. So when one properly studies the Bhagavad Gita as it is, that is blissful, actually. When one calls upon the names of the Supreme Controller, the Ishvara Parama, in proper consciousness, and that proper consciousness does take a while to come to, then that is also blissful. But it all begins with understanding the truth about reality. I was explaining to some people on the call earlier that the reason why people have difficulties in life is because they don't understand life. So the Bhagavad Gita as it is a map. So first, this is how the world really works. And when you understand how it really works, then you can navigate the reality. And this is the scary thing for most people. Most people, they're not able to navigate reality because they don't understand reality. What they navigate is their idea of reality, or their attachments, or their fantasies, or their expectations. I was giving a seminar on relationships earlier today. We spoke for about an hour and a half. And I was talking about Prince, the rock star. I talked about many things, but I talked about Prince. And I was sharing with them that many years ago, I went to see him in concert. It was a concert in Earl's Court. And I was saying to them, what was interesting about his image was that his image was deliberately mysterious. And many celebrities have this image, many pop stars, etc. So what you do is you have a real figure, but you make their marketing and their image mysterious. So what does that do? It's like having a canvas. There's something on the canvas, but there's a lot of space on the canvas. What do people do? I know something about him, but there's a lot of mystique. What people will do is they'll fill in the gaps. And how they fill in the gaps? They'll project onto this person whatever they want him to be for them to adore him. You understand? And we do the same thing for life. If we don't tune into a higher source of knowledge, Tattvasandarbha says this, Jiva Goswami says this, that because we have limited senses, we have to understand the truth from a superior source. That superior source is called the descending process, where knowledge is coming not only from scripture, but it is also coming from those who are perfectly aligned with scripture. As we said, evam parampara praptam, parampara, a line of disciplic succession going all the way back to who? Interesting. In this Bhagavad Gita as it is, right at the beginning, the names of the prominent people, prominent acharyas in the line of disciplic succession, their names are given. And their names are given going all the way back to guess who? To Krishna himself. So it's no longer a question of speculation. It's no longer a question of people having different ideas and people thinking different things. You have an unbroken chain. And I checked this, by the way. That unbroken chain and those names, they perfectly correlate with the explanation given by the Bhagavad Purana. So for example, in that chain of disciplic succession, you have Krishna, you have Lord Brahma, you have Narada Muni, so many personalities. And when you read the Bhagavad Purana, the same thing matches up, which is exactly what you would expect if the knowledge is actually consistently correct. Interesting. In the Bhagavad Purana, there's a term that's used for Shiva, Vaishnavanam Yata Shambhu. The translation is that Shiva is Vaishnava. He's the topmost worshipper of who? Vaishnava means worshipper of Vishnu or Krishna. We've already quoted Lord Brahma, Ishvara Parama, Krishna, Satchit Ananda Vigraha, Anadi Adi Govinda Sava Karana Karanam. That's from the Brahma Samhita chapter 5, first verse. And then we've quoted Bhagavad Gita, and all Hindus accept Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 10, text number 8, and Krishna himself is saying, Aham Savasu Prabhavo, Mata Savam Pravartate, Iti Matvat Bhajante Mam, Bhuta Bhavana Samamvitaha. I'm the source of all spiritual and material worlds, everything emanates from me. In other places, he'll say that he is the source of all the demigods as well. Very interesting. So when we take all of these things into account, there is a very clear and consistent message. In fact, even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives us the summary understanding of all the Vedas. What does he say? What does he say? He says, Savasichaham Riddhi Shani Vishto, Matasmriti Jnanam Apohanam Cha, Vedescha Save Aham Eva Vedyo, Vedanta Krit Vedavit Eva Chaham. Chapter 15, text number 15. By all the Vedas, Vedescha Save Aham Eva Vedyo, Vedanta Krit Vedavit Eva Chaham. By all the Vedas, he says, I am to be known. And as the last piece of evidence, every Vedic literature has what is called a Paribhas Sutra. Paribhas Sutra means an emperor verse. It is the one verse in that literature which gives the ultimate understanding of the entire literature. So in the Bhagavad Purana, first canto, chapter 3, verse number 28, it is explained. I'll read you I'll say the Sanskrit. Ete chamsa kalau pumsa, Krishna stu Bhagavan Swayam. Now it's very interesting. It's said that there are many incarnations of God, right? And then it says two. Two means but. Krishna's two. But Krishna, he is what? Bhagavan. Bhaga means opulences. Van means one who possesses. So when a person has 6 opulences, 6 key opulences to an unlimited degree, that person is considered to be Bhagavan Swayam. Swayam means original. Krishna Stu Bhagavan Swayam. And so Jiva Goswami, who's one of the topmost scholars of all Vedic literatures, and who came directly from the spiritual world, in the Tattva Sandarbha, his own literature, he explains how of all the literatures, the Bhagavad Purana, and he also gives credence to the Bhagavad Gita, etc. They're the highest, and they give a very clear explanation as to who is the Ishvara. These 6 opulences are knowledge, strength, fame, beauty, strength, renunciation. So let's just go from again, because I don't want to check I've got all 6 of them right. Knowledge, strength, fame, wealth, beauty, and renunciation. Yes. So these are considered to be the 6 opulences, the Bhaga. And as is explained in Bhagavad Purana, Krishna stu Bhagavan Swayam. So according to the Bhagavad Purana, according to this emperor verse, Krishna's not even an incarnation of God. Not even an incarnation of God. The direct Sanskrit says that he is Swayam, the original Bhagavan, the original form. And the analogy that's used is just like you have a candle, and then you can light all the other candles with the first candle. Krishna is that first candle according to the Vedic literatures. Okay, I'm going to pause there. I know we shared a lot with you. And We're going to go to questions. How are we going to do this? Are you going to, Ashwin, are you going to ask the questions, or how should we do this?
Are you able to see the chat?
Yes, I can, actually.
Good. So we could do both. We can do both. People can either put the questions on the chat, or we can unmute people and they can speak directly.
Okay, so that's a very, let me start with the question that's there. I'll read it out and I'll answer, then we can go from there. So if Krishna is the origin of everything, keeping that in mind, if we strongly believe in a particular deity, e.g. Hanuman, Ganapati, Lakshmi, or any other deity, and pray on that particular deity, then are we in Krishna consciousness, or are we not in his service? Thank you. First of all, thank you for that question. It's a good question. Let me ask you this question. Many of you on the call are parents. If someone comes to your children, right? Let's say you've got grown-up children who are young adults themselves. So your parents, you have adult children. If people come to your children and they interact with your children and they know that those children are children of yourselves. In other words, they know the children and they know the parents of the children. And if they deal with your children nicely in order to develop a relationship with you as a parent, is that bad or good? Is there anything wrong with that? Yes or no? There's nothing wrong with that, right? Because they're coming to your children, they're being friendly, they're being respectful, but they know that they're your children. Okay? They know that the children are not the same as you. This is the child of Mira, or the child of Bina, or the child of Pramila, whatever it is, right? But they come to the children and they know this is the child of this other person. That's fine. If, however, they come to your children and they confuse your children with you, then there's something strange going on. That's not correct. So in the same way, the demigods, the devas, are great devotees of Krishna. So if we respect the demigods, as we said, Lord Shiva, Vaishnavanam, Yata Shambhu. If we respect the demigods and we approach them with the mood of becoming better servants of Krishna, please help me to do my devotion to Krishna. If we respect them in that mood, that is sanctioned by the Vedas. If, however, we take the demigods to be the ultimate supreme, then not only will the demigods be displeased, but also the supreme person, Krishna, he will also be displeased. But there's a little bit more to it than that. See, this is important. There's a difference between the God that people think about normally and Krishna or Ishvarya in the Vedas. Most people think about God in most religions. They think about God as being a bad parent, someone who's going to scare you and punish you if you don't do what he says. The Vedic conception of Krishna is much sweeter, deeper, more affectionate. When Krishna is displeased, please understand this, he's not displeased for himself. When Krishna is displeased, it's because he sees the people he loves the most doing something that is not in their best interest. You understand? That's Krishna is the ultimate loving parent. So when so we want this to be in proper context. So we respect the demigods, all demigods. We respect the humans and we respect the animals. So if we respect animals and humans, how much more so we should respect demigods? But we do not confuse the demigods to be the same as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's the important. And if we approach demigods, it should be in the mood of, please help me to do service and to surrender to Krishna. So what we would do is we may respect demigods, but we would still engage in our service, in our devotional service to Krishna. And we would, if we pray to demigods, we would pray to them, please help me to serve Krishna. So if they're approached in that way, it is one thing. If they're approached in a material way or in the wrong way, then Krishna is displeased and they're displeased, because what happens is we don't gain the same spiritual blessings which help us to achieve the ultimate happiness that we want to achieve. Bear in mind, and I'll tell you honestly, practically everyone on this call in your previous life, not necessarily your last life, but in a previous life, you've been demigods. Okay? It is explained in the Vedas that when we first leave Krishna, the first birth that the living entity takes is as Lord Brahma. So Lord Brahma is actually a position, you see? So there's a planet, Brahmaloka. On Brahmaloka, Lord Brahma resides, but he's not alone. There are other living entities with him on Brahmaloka. And even more, the Vedas explain that there are multiple universes, and every single material universe has its own Lord Brahma. In this particular universe, our Lord Brahma has a certain features. In other material universes, other Lord Brahmas have slightly different features. So Lord Brahma is a position. So being a demigod is a certain birth. So those who take birth in the higher planetary systems take birth as demigods. But the demigods, that position is not eternal. So this is why it's important to understand the difference. And this is why we don't take demigod worship to be the primary thing or the all in all. Because the demigods, they have to die. They take birth and they have to die. So that position is temporary. Whereas if someone engages in pure loving service to Krishna, when one returns to the spiritual world, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita directly, when one returns, one never has to take birth again in this material world. That's the answer to that particular question. Okay.
There's another couple of questions in the chat. Sorry. Can you unmute yourself, Bhuta?
Yes. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can now.
Yes, so the next question is the origin of Bhagavan described anywhere in Vedic literature? Yes and no. So I'll explain what I mean by that. First of all, it's explained in many places in the Vedic literature that Krishna is unborn, you know? So he has no origin. In fact, that's a definition. What is also explained, interestingly enough, though, is that he appears in the material world by his own sweet will at certain times. So that's not that he has a material birth, but he chooses to appear on the earth at a particular time. Why? It's explained in the Bhagavad Gita, yada yada hidamasya, glanya bhavati bharata, right? So he explains that whenever there is a rise in irreligion and a decline in religion, he himself descends in order to re-establish religious principles. So by definition, the supreme personality of Godhead, he has no material birth. And I think even in one of the quotes I read you, it says in the beginning, there was only Krishna. So he's not material, he does not appear at a particular point in time. He's actually eternally existent. Yeah, okay. Let me move on to another question.
Got a hand up. Maybe you can have a verbal one.
Sure, okay.
Could Leah Chadva, yeah, unmuted.
Hello. So it's more probably a religious question, but so if Krishna Bhagwan is the supreme God,
Yes.
why do we pray to Ganesh Bhagwan first before we do any other prayers? Why do we always start with Ganesh Bhagwan and not Krishna Bhagwan?
First of all, I can see you. Okay, I see your hand up now. Okay. Well, it depends on what your prayers are. See, the Vedas is very interesting. The Vedas give different types of processes for different purposes. And the reason for that is because the Supreme is extremely compassionate. He wants everyone to ultimately turn to him. But if he sees, okay, people are so attached to some material thing, then there are certain processes in the Vedas where people can achieve that. But why is it given? It's given because at least they'll accept the authority of the Vedas. If they accept the authority of the Vedas, then over time, as they read those same Vedas, the Vedas will say that if you want this, you can pray to this demigod. If you want this, you can pray to that demigod. But these things that you're praying for are temporary. And the ultimate happiness and fulfillment that you're looking for will come if you pray to Krishna, if you serve Krishna. So in some ceremonies, they'll invoke Ganeshji, etc. But it's not in all ceremonies like that. In fact, there are many prayers, many ceremonies, many purposes where actually Krishna is invoked or Vishnu is invoked first. So it's important to actually notice that. So it depends on what kind of process someone is following. But ultimately, as we said, Vedescha Sarve Aham Eva Vedyo. The purpose of all the Vedas is to bring one to the understanding that what Krishna is the supreme. Right? And so what is that? Krishna is making this verse. Bahunam Jamanamante, Gyanavamam Prapadyate, Vasudeva Sarvam Iti, Sarmahatma Sudurlabhaha. Krishna is explaining in the Bhagavad Gita, after many lifetimes, one who is perfectly understood, a Jnani, one who's developed proper knowledge, proper Gyan. He understands Vasudeva Sarvam Iti. Sarvam means everything. Vasudeva is another name for Krishna. Such a person understands that Krishna is everything. Sa Mahatma Sudurlabhaha. Such a great soul is very rare. You see? That is exactly stated in the Bhagavad Gita. All Hindus accept the Bhagavad Gita. And that is directly stated in the Bhagavad Gita. So aside from ceremonies, because ceremonies can be of many different types, it doesn't change the fact of the ultimate understanding of who is the supreme according to the Bhagavad Gita, which is the most famous, most prominent, and the most widely understood and known Vedic literature to Hindus and even beyond. I'm going to go to another question. So let's see. So how do we get? So how do we get over the barrier that demigod and Krishna thinking? We've invested time in honoring a demigod. So how can we remove that surrendering to Krishna? Thank you. Okay, this is so interesting. I know one person who's a devotee of Krishna. Her whole upbringing, her family and her worshipped Lord Shiva. And what happened was she had a dream. This is mentioned in a book. I know the lady actually, but this is also mentioned in a book called Shuddha Bhakti Chintamani by one guru called Shiv Ram Swami. And it's mentioned in this book. So what happened was they'd been worshipping Lord Shiva and Lord Shiva appeared to her in a dream. And he actually told her, yes, it's good that you've been worshipping me, but you should understand my master, Krishna. So you should worship him. So one of the things that happen, although we shouldn't just stick to the worship of demigods, but if people worship demigods, but they don't know any better, and it's done sincerely, then they'll be exposed to a higher understanding. To be honest, that's how it works. It can be for lifetimes, but they'll be exposed to a higher understanding. So we should take it, even the conversation we're having now. Some of you on this call right now, the reason why you're being exposed to this understanding is that you may have had some connection either in this life or previous lives to demigods. And because they've seen that you're sincerely trying to know the truth, they're also exposing you or arranging that you're exposed to the ultimate understanding. And so it's very, very simple. There are many demigods, many personalities in the higher planetary systems. So it's explained that there are lower planetary systems, there are medium planetary systems, and the Earth planet is in the medium planetary system. And then there are higher planetary systems, which are the heavenly realms. The lower systems are the hellish. People talk about hell, there's more than one hellish place. There's more than one hellish environment. And in fact, the Bhagavad Purana in the 5th canto, it describes in detail different types of hell, unfortunately. Then there's the medium planetary systems, of which the Earth planet is one of them. And then there are the higher planetary systems, where you have the higher planets. So Tapaloka, Satyaloka, so many different higher planets. And in those planets, you have entities or living beings, demigods, who exist in those higher planetary systems. But even they fall down eventually, even they have to die eventually. And this is also explained by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Abrama Bhuvana Loka. From the highest planets, from the planets of Lord Brahma, even downwards, all the places of death. This is very clearly explained. So all of these different places, anyone in the higher planetary systems, the Earth planetary systems, or the lower ones, none of them stay there forever. They have to die and take birth again until they worship Krishna and become a pure servant of Krishna, in which case they no longer have to go through this cycle of samsara, which is the cycle of birth, death, disease, old age, and taking birth again and again and again. Okay, so I hope that's answered that particular question.
We've come to an end, but there's a few more questions. Do you have time to take the remaining questions?
Let me go on. Yes, so Krishna appears in the Mahabharata. Are we talking about the same Krishna? I see an incarnation of Vishnu. Where is Lord Shiva in this hierarchy? So first of all, yes, in the Mahabharata, we're talking about the same Krishna. How do we know? Because the Bhagavad Gita is a section of the Mahabharata. Okay, the Mahabharata, Itihasa. The Mahabharata is an Itihasa. The Ramayana is an Itihasa. What does Itihasa mean? Iti ahasa. Iti, thus, it, hasa, happened. So the Itihasa and the Ramayana, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, they're both Itihasas. They're both histories. Yeah. So that same Krishna that we're reading about in the Mahabharata is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the Bhagavad Gita, which we quoted, is the conversation that is within the Mahabharata. So we know it's the same person. Second point, this point about Vishnu, no. Actually, Krishna is the original. Vishnu comes from Krishna. You see, there's an important misunderstanding that many people have. And the reason for that is because, as we said, they don't know the etymology, meaning that the sequence of things that happen. In the spiritual world, Krishna is ever existing. He comes into the material world at a certain time. So he came to the material world 5,000 years ago. Okay, so we all heard about that. 5,000 years ago, Krishna appeared on the planet, but that does not mean that he did not exist before he came to this material world. He existed eternally and he appeared here 5,000 years ago. So because people think he appeared 5,000 years ago, they think he came after Vishnu. No, he exists eternally, but he just appeared on earth 5,000 years ago. In fact, it is explained that Krishna is engaging in his pastimes in different material universes simultaneously. So he was here 5,000 years ago. He'll be in some other material universe at some point, at some other material universe at some point. He's not limited. It's just like you go to work and you come, let's say you come home, you're not going to work on the coronavirus, I understand, but let's say on a normal situation, you would go to work and then your family, let's say you have a job and you leave home at 7 a.m., you go to work and you don't come back until 5 p.m., okay? But let's say that day your children were on holiday, so they were still at home, okay? Let's say it was summer holidays. So your children at home, and then let's say that a workman came to the house at 3 p.m. in the afternoon to fix something in your house. So the workman came at 3 p.m. and then you came at 5 p.m. So people, oh, maybe the workman came before mum and dad. No, mum and dad were always there. They popped out, they came back in. The workman came at 3 p.m. Mum and dad reappeared at 5 p.m., but they were there before the workman. So the point is, Krishna is also the origin of Vishnu. And there's actually a quote in the Vedic literatures. There are many quotes which explain that directly as well, because that's a misconception that many people have. I came across that quote recently again. It's in the first, it's mentioned in the purport in the first canto of the Bhagavad Purana. There's actually a quote explaining that point. Anyway, what karma could Brahma do that did not return him to Krishna? So what happens, Brahma is a very exalted person. The one difficulty is Brahma is the first person in the material universe. So the difficulty that happens is that for many living entities, when they first take birth as Lord Brahma, they become attached to being the controller because they're controlling so many things. And so they become attached, like, oh, actually, you know, I'm in charge, I'm making it all happen. And that attachment to being the controller means that when they leave, when they pass away after being in that body of Brahma, they then take birth in another lower species, etc. But it is also explained that sometimes it does happen when we first take birth as Lord Brahma. If someone in that life realizes, oh my God, I should worship Krishna purely, then they can go back from Lord Brahma straight back to the spiritual world. It does happen, it can happen. It's just that in many cases, we become so attached to being in charge that we then end up taking another birth in the material world. Okay, just to explain that. Bhakti Yoga is a connection between Ishvara and Jiva, but what does Bhakti Yoga actually mean? Is it remembering, reading, and singing God's stories, or something else as well? It's all of those, but primarily the essence of Bhakti Yoga is to chant the names of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is explained in the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, Harinama, Harinama, Harinam Eva Kevalam, Kalo Nastyeva, Nastyeva, Nastyeva Gatiya Anyata. The Vedas explain that there are many processes of self-realization, but in this age, in this Kali Yuga, you know, Kalo Nastyeva, in this age of Kali Yuga, in order to become completely perfect in this period of history, one must take to the chanting of the holy names of Krishna. If you do that, it's so amazing. I'll be honest with you. If you do that, what happens is it does what's called Cheto Darpana Marjanam. It cleans away all the layers, all the impurities from the heart. And therefore, when you chant, when you read, and when you do service to Krishna, you feel ecstasy. You actually feel blissful. The holy name is by nature intensely blissful. If someone's pure and they chant the holy name, they immediately become submerged in intense ecstasy, because the holy name is non-different from Krishna. When someone is pure, when they read the Bhagavad Gita, they immediately feel a connection, an ecstatic connection. But because we're not pure, we first do it, and when we first do it, we may not get that full feeling, but if we keep doing it, it clears away the layers, the material covering from the soul, and when the material layers, as they become more cleared away, anything you do in spiritual service to Krishna, you feel intense, immediate bliss just by doing that activity. That's actually how it works. That holy name is by nature blissful. Bhagavad Gita, as it is, if it's proper Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, all of these are intensely blissful by nature. But because we're covered, we don't experience the ecstasy of them immediately. But we keep practicing, reading, etc. And most important, chanting the names of Krishna. And then what will happen is, as we become purified by the process, you can actually taste the ecstasy that comes from directly chanting the names of Krishna. That's actually the truth. And people who've been doing this for a long time and sincerely, if you actually ask them honestly, if they're advanced in Krishna consciousness, and you ask them if they think that you're going to be humble and honest, they'll tell you, actually, you know what? It's really blissful. It's intensely blissful. That said, even in the early stages, you can still taste some happiness. But when you practice it properly, without offense, and purify yourself, it's off the scale. It's off the scale. You'll think that you'll feel like you've hit the jackpot. It's intensely fulfilling, but in a way that nothing in the material world comes close. That's the truth. Okay, let me just see if there's any other question. Do we have more
Before you-
time or not?
Before you carry on, yes, we still have 78 people on the group, but we had up to 87 earlier on. So if those people who needs to go, please feel free to carry on. And Bhuta Bhavana, if you're able to take a few more questions, that'd be great. But otherwise, we have copied all the questions, so we will put those on Sunday at Q&A. So
Sure.
hopefully, if you're having to go, we'll secure your questions and cover those later on as well. But please carry on. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. And I'm gonna go to one. I'm gonna change the order slightly because I can see there's a statement said there's a story why Ganesh is worshipped first. Yeah, there are many different pastimes, but again, to be honest, because we've again not trying to in any way be I don't know, just be very open and honest. We've studied these Vedic literatures for 25 years under very learned spiritual teachers in the Vaishnava tradition. So definitely Ganesh is worshipped. In some ceremonies, the reason why Ganesh is invoked first is to remove obstacles to the particular ceremony, but it is also explained that Ganesh's ability to remove obstacles is actually coming from the Supreme Lord himself. Specifically, it is explained that Ganesh's ability to remove obstacles comes from a form of Krishna named Lord Nrsingadev. So there are scriptures which explain that. Lord Nrsingadev has the potency to remove all obstacles and blockages. And Ganesh gets his potency to do that from Lord Nrsingadev. And Lord Nrsingadev is also an incarnation of Krishna. So just to kind of, again, put that into context. Okay, let me go back to this other one. Can you please explain incarnation of Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, and Guru Nanak? Okay, I don't know too much about Guru Nanak, so I won't say that. Jesus and Muhammad, they're explained in a literature called the Bhavishya Purana. Bhavishya means future. So in the Vedic literature, the Bhavishya Purana, it explains the coming of Jesus like thousands of years before he appears on the planet. And it also explains the coming of Muhammad thousands of years before they appear on the planet. And it explains that these personalities are what we call Shakti Avesh avatars. That is, they are living entities who have received a certain type of empowerment to help to make people more God conscious. Okay, so Jesus and Muhammad definitely. Buddha is also explained in the Bhagavad Purana. It's explained, I think it's in the first canto. It explains his name. It explains where he'll be born. If I remember correctly, it also explains the name of his parents, but definitely his name and where he'll be born. It says he'll be born in Gaya, So Buddha is actually an incarnation of Krishna. And I was listening to something. So in the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is explained as to why Buddha came. So it is explained in the Bhagavad Purana that Buddha came at a time where people were misusing the Vedic literatures as an excuse to mistreat animals, to kill innocent creatures. And Krishna came in the form of Lord Buddha, and in the form of Lord Buddha, he just preached ahimsa, which is non-violence, because the people were not so advanced that they could accept the entire teaching. So what he did is he gave them just this ahimsa, because if they practiced ahimsa properly, non-violence, then they would be better positioned in consciousness to then later understand even more deeper understandings about the ultimate goal of life. So Buddha is mentioned in the Bhagavad Purana in the first canto as well. So the other thing is, yes, there is, so Bhati, absolutely, there is only one God. But there are different incarnations of that one God. But then separately from that, there are demigods and there are human beings, you see? So some personalities mentioned in the scriptures are actually Krishna in different incarnations, but there are some personalities such as Shiva, Brahma, Indra, they're demigods. They're not incarnations of God. They're not forms of God. They are demigods. And they will pass away. They will appear at a certain time and they will pass away from the world at a certain time. Even in the higher planets, those demigods also have to die. They also have to pass away. They do not remain forever. So yeah, just to explain. Okay, let's see. Also Ganesh. Right. So let me also explain this. There are scriptures for those there are scriptures in the mode of ignorance, scriptures in the mode of passion, and there are scriptures in the mode of goodness. The Srimad Bhagavatam, according to Sattva Sandarbha, is even beyond the mode of goodness. So it's considered to be the ultimate literature. And the point is, even if there are different pastimes and so on, because there are many pastimes like that, it is not the case that that means that Krishna's position is one of the demigods. Whatever the pastime, it is very, very clearly stated. And again, we will state it. And this is, as we said, the Emperor verse, Paribhas Sutra. Ete chamsa kalau pumsa, Krishna stu Bhagavan Swayam. And this is also why we made the point right at the beginning that without a mood of being ready to hear and really understand how things are explained in the scriptures themselves, it is easy to take different pastimes and to draw the wrong conclusion from those pastimes. For example, in the Ramayana, we often see or hear that Lord Ram, he pays so much respect to Lord Shiva. But that doesn't mean that Lord Ram isn't the supreme personality of Godhead. When it's understood in the line of teachers, it is clearly explained that Lord Ram, he also has love for his devotees. Lord Krishna, we also know he has great love for his devotees. Just like his devotees want to serve him, Krishna also wants to serve his devotees as well. So we should not misunderstand some of the loving dealings and the loving exchanges. We should not interpret them in the wrong way. Okay, let me move on. Why is Krishna blue? Interesting. So that complexion that Krishna has, he has a real desire to love, for loving exchanges with his devotees. So that complexion that Krishna has, two things I'll say about it. One is that complexion signifies the complexion of the supreme controller. That color indicates the supreme controller. The second thing is that blackish bluish complexion that Krishna has, that complexion is most attractive to the topmost servants and worshippers of Krishna, who are the gopis. So his complexion also is there to bring great joy to his most confidential servants and associates. Okay, so this other point, who is Narayan? Narayan is another form of Krishna. Okay, and this point about Shiva worship Vishnu and Vishnu worship Krishna, yes, so they are in a loving exchange, but Shiva does not say that Vishnu is equal to him. Nowhere in the scripture does it say that. Shiva says actually in the scriptures that Krishna is the supreme. And Krishna also says that he's the supreme as well. So again, if we take it on the authority of scripture, this is exactly what the scriptures say. And we gave you those quotes earlier as well. And you can check these quotes. Feel free to read this purple. Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 10, text number 8. So what Prabhupada has done in the purple, he's quoted and given you the exact references for other Vedic literatures, all of which support the same point. And in that way, you can understand, you have a very clear understanding of exactly the situation and the position of all those different personalities. I'll say one other thing about Lord Shiva. In the Vedic literatures, it is explained that there are guna avatars. So guna means modes. So Sattvam Rajas Tama iti gune prakriti sambhavaha nirbadnanti mahabaho dehi nam avyayam. Sattvam Rajas Tama iti. Sattva is the mode of goodness. Rajas is the mode of passion. Tama is the mode of ignorance. So different personalities look after different modes. So Tama, the Tamagun, is looked after by Shiva. Okay. The Rajagun, the mode of passion, is looked after by Lord Brahma. And Vishnu, the Supreme, he looks after the mode of goodness. So the mode of goodness is for maintenance. The mode of passion is to initiate something. The mode of ignorance is to destroy. So you can see how all of this links up. Lord Brahma is the first living entity in the material universe, and he creates on behalf of Krishna. It is explained in the Bhagavad Purana that Krishna plays his flute, and that vibration actually is received by Brahma and has all the instructions as to how he should work on behalf of Krishna in order to look after the material universe, this particular universe. Okay, let me maybe take one or two more, then I may have to go. Thank you very much. I really appreciate everything you said. Okay, okay, that's fine. Is anyone keeping contact out of this course? Yeah, I'm going to put this in the chat window. So I have an Instagram. So feel free to connect with me on Instagram. That's probably the easiest way. And I've got a podcast. So I'm going to also share that. And the podcast is really, and this is available, so it's on Apple and Spotify and SoundCloud. I'll just say available on. And what we've tried to do in the podcast is really find ways of taking the Vedic wisdom and showing people how to practically apply that Vedic wisdom in their day-to-day lives. So for example, the first podcast is all about self-esteem and self-value. And that's inspired by an understanding of the modes of material nature. So when people have low self-esteem, it's too low, that's often some mode of ignorance. When they think they're better than other people, too much self-esteem, they value themselves too much, that's the mode of passion. And when their self-esteem is healthy, so they value themselves and other people equally, that is self-esteem in the mode of goodness. Okay, anyway, so please do check that out. Okay, I think we will have to close here. I'm sorry we weren't able to cover all the questions, but we hope we covered quite a few for you.
We certainly have, and we've gone, well, 21 minutes over, so thank you very much indeed. And we have copied all the questions. We've copied your connections as well, so we'll put that into our group. There's 106 people on our WhatsApp group with this new course alone, in addition to another 100 plus in our old group that you're familiar with when you first used to come to Warsaw. So we're a growing population. So thank you very much again. And it's always a gem. I remember taking a gem I've heard a few times, but the one today I liked that you mentioned about the analogy between parents and the child getting mixed up. And there's a huge difference. And we always say that the child looks very similar to the parent. But of course, if you make that mistake, then that analogy between Bhagwan and demigod is one that you can remember very easily.
Absolutely. And it's also, it's not controversial. If you study the Vedic literatures, these things are very clear. They're clearly stated in Bhagavad Gita as it is, and they're explained in many other literatures. There are literally thousands of verses which explain this. But one simply has to do a sincere search, but it has to be done with guidance from spiritual masters. That's why things get confused, because as we said at the beginning, if people just try to read for themselves, then you may not understand the entirety of the literature. And therefore it has to be understood under guidance of bona fide spiritual masters, spiritual teachers, then you'll get the correct understanding. Okay, thank you very much.